I worked at Chance Brothers from 56 till 64. They taught me to be a first-class analytical chemist.
My great-grandfather, John Ward, came down from Sunderland. We're not quite sure when, and moved to Spon Lane, a house in Spon Lane. His middle son, Edward, was my grandfather. So great-grandfather and grandfather were both at Chance's.
When I got married, we got married in the October. I sighted him in May. We got married in the October. I'd already got the house, which was the entrance to Chance's, on the Spon Lane entrance, number 24 Spon Lane. So if I was on mornings, 6 o'clock, I used to go up at 20 to 6 and be clocked in by 6 o'clock. And if a ship fitter walking past didn't see the bathroom light on, he used to knock the doorbell for me, so I don't want late.
In the laboratory itself, we were a very close group. We played table tennis every lunchtime because most of the teams that played in the leagues came from the lab. And we did everything together. And it was a wonderful experience. We had a boss who, when we were juniors, we had to address him as Mr. Davis. But once we moved from the junior standing, we called him by his initials, JD. And he was very much a father figure. Although he was the worst chemist I ever met, he was a real father figure. And his understudy, Joe Peatman, was the finest chemist I've ever worked with and a first-class table tennis player.
Well, of course, I did go to visit Chance's in my last year at school because they took us around all the various companies in Smethwick to see whether we could find something to do, a job. So we went to Geskin Nettlewalls and Avery's and Chance's. And of course, I remember going to the Chance factory and seeing the plate glass rolling off the mill, seeing it all come off. It was a huge place, very, very hot. Because, of course, the plate glass was still virtually, just off molten. And it was a marvellous experience.
My father also went to work there when he was a young man. My father was a gatherer, but I don't know what that means. His best man, Walter Chadwick, was a glassblower. And when Chance's closed, Walter went on to Briley Hill Glass. And he was there until he retired.
It's great. I was on shifts, morning, afternoons, nights. And so we got to go to every department. And I was fascinated by some of the departments, especially the flat glass that was being made and all that. Until there was trouble when I had to sort it out. And then the tubing, it's just fantastic to watch it being made, quite honestly.
When we first began our training, Jerry and I, my friend from school, and we started on the same day, one of our first major jobs was to take the laboratory post. And we did that for a whole year. We had leather satchels. We went round the works taking the post from the laboratory to the different departments. At the end of my first year, I was getting a little bit frustrated that I wasn't really being trained as a chemist. So I went to see my boss, JD, and said to him, why are we just delivering post? And he said, if we keep you, I got very worried about that, if we keep you and you become a senior glass analyst and there's a problem on the works and we send you out to sort it out, people will know who you are because you took the post as a junior. That was a great eye-opener for me of the way that we were trained. It was all thought out. And Jerry and I went out with our satchels and everybody in the work started to call us Charlie and Charlie's mate. We never found out which one was Charlie, which one was Charlie's mate.
My father mentioned that he thoroughly enjoyed whatever job he did. He was disappointed during the Second World War because he wanted to join the Navy, but he was working on scientific glass, as was my mother at the time, and also radar screens. So there's not much else I can tell you about the way he worked. I always remember that myself and my brother had to go to Chance's children's Christmas parties, which I hated. But we went year after year until they stopped.
I say my father-in-law worked there, which he worked on the layer. My father worked there. He was doing to do with the soda ash and the sand, taking it to the layers. Mother worked there. She worked in the fiesta. My mother-in-law worked in the fiesta. And also my brother-in-law worked on the layer. So it's been a family affair.
Right, so I'm Sebastian Chance, and my father was Jeremy Chance, and I'm the great-great-grandson of James Timmins Chance. That's my connection to the family, really. I have no connection to the glassworks as such. I didn't work for them. My grandfather, Hugh Chance, was the last chairman of the company, right up until the 1950s. Got very fond of the Black Country, and then, of course, realised that the factory was just up the road, really. And in 1974, I came to the 125th anniversary celebrations at the works. And that was what really got me interested, I think. Going around the factory, seeing the glass being produced. It was fantastic. It was amazing.
It was like being part of a big family. It was a wonderful experience. I never worked anywhere longer than I worked at Chance Brothers. It was a massive place, and like I said in the little film that we made, as a 16-year-old, I never thought I'd see the day of the firm closing in my lifetime. And that was a great sadness.
Why did you think that?
I just felt it would carry on forever because of the products that we made, and we were very versatile. We tried different things. I can remember when we made the first leg glass tubing with an electric furnace, which was the first one in the works of its kind. And we did a little run on fiberglass. And then, of course, we had a big roll plate section, and we also had our Fiesta glassware as well.
I mean, going back to when we was kids and living on the Harvey Road at the other entrance, the foghorns at night, when they used to test the foghorns, used to wake us up in the night, hadn't they, Barry? Yes. The foghorns, when they used to test for lighthouse lights, they used to shine in our back bedroom, because the back of the houses went onto the back of the lighthouse works at part.
The lighthouse division had moved to Crawley then, so the only thing that we did was make the glass itself. I can always remember the one Easter we used to make a lot of the glass in great big platinum buckets. So you can imagine the cost of a platinum bucket. One Easter one went missing and they never found it.
Oh, it was family atmosphere. It was literally family atmosphere. I think a lot of it was because it was families, generations, still working all together, like, I mean, like my neighbours, it was the father and the two sons, and the other, and same as us down the same line. And no matter where you went, you knew everybody knew you as well. It was very, very nice, Regretted that I moved, but still.
I think it was just the fact that there was such a spirit of togetherness, and it was like family. You respected your senior members, as I've been saying. Although JD was not a good chemist, he was a wonderful boss. He was like a father figure. The day before I got married, he asked me into his office and gave me a fatherly talk. And that really sums up what the works was like. I can remember my very first week. There were a good number of trainees that had been enlisted during the summer months. Something like about 20 of us. I've got a photograph at home taken of us with Dr. Hampton, the managing director, who actually came through the labs. And one day after our induction week, I was walking down to take samples with another senior chemist, and Dr. Hampton said, "Good morning, Southam." I didn't even realise he knew my name. And that was amazing to me.
What I do think is interesting is how the business considered itself as an employer. So they got the most out of their workforce because they didn't just pay them at the end of the day, but they provided a world for them. So there was the social club down the way, there was the sports teams you could join, there was the canteen, there was the school, there was all these sorts of things. You could feel part of a community. And I think perhaps if there's anything employers can learn from today, it's about making your workforce feel part of something collective like that, like we were saying, that you feel like you're doing something worthwhile for as part of a machine rather than just a grunt that gets paid at the end of the day.
It's worth knowing that there are still companies in operation that show their direct lineage from Chance Brothers. There's Chance and Hunt in Runcorn, which is part of a A-list. There's Chance Brothers Company Limited, which still exists on paper anyway. There's Ibstock Brick. There's Chance Glass in Malvern. So from that point of view, we shouldn't really speak of Chance Brothers if it's quit or stopped, because there are still echoes existing still. Insofar as its legacy, I've been always been quite firm on that, is that there have been some extraordinary companies come out of Smethwick in the years, GKN, Bermid, M&B, Carriage Works, and people speak of all of them with pride. And in my talk, I mentioned Henry Hope, who glazed the House of Commons. I mentioned Fox and Henderson, who made the framework for the Crystal Palace. And yet, Chances, there's still a sort of glitter, a glamour attached to Chances. And you have to ask why, because sure, glass with its crystal magic still retains some sort of, there's a sort of fairy dust aspect to it because it's pretty, but it's more than that.
I think it just really awakened in me more of a knowledge of the enormous things that they created and that they'd achieved over the 125-year period of the company. And just watching, I can remember watching the glass coming off the rollers, I suppose the noise and the activity, people making the handkerchief vases, everything about it. I mean, I've always found factories interesting. And, to see people working there and talking to people. I remember talking to people who had been working there for decades. And what impressed me was how they really valued the company. And I think they felt they'd been well looked after. They'd been well treated. And I suppose there's a certain pride in that. You know that the employee was a good employee, the employer rather was a good employer, and that the people working there were happy. And generations of people in this area had worked for the company.
Oh, it was the best 16 years of my life. In that aspect, I mean, how can I put it? I've done 16 Christmas days, for example. And one Christmas day, my son was due to be born, and I still went to work. And we came up to my house every year, because we lived at the entrance for every year. Came up mid-morning, and my brother there called in and took my wife up to her mother's. So I rung the afternoon man. He came in a bit earlier. And we used to do that, if people got family troubles and all that, we used to come in early or go stop later and things like that.
Some of the things that we did, as well as taking the post, the other jobs that Jerry and I had to do as the juniors was sample. And when sand came into the works, it came in 20 railway trucks. And we used to have to climb into each railway truck and take a sample, 3 samples from each truck, and then go and sieve it, wet sieve it, to find how many plate particles were in it. And we used to have to sample the coal because we didn't have sufficient gas from suppliers, so we had our own gas plant. And we used to have to take gas samples every day, and we used to have to sample the coal samples that came again in railway trucks. And we had a special little room in the laboratory where we had to prepare the sample for an analysis. And it was totally enclosed because you came out looking like a coal black mammy. We had this Heath Robinson coffee grinding machine. When we'd quartered and got the coal down to the right size, the room was full of black dust, and we were covered with it as well.
You just look around here today at this Bi-Centenary, people are always dying to come up and say, My dad worked at Chance, I worked at Chance's, and there's a pride involved. It wasn't as if it was something they had to go through. They really enjoyed the whole process of being there.
Some ways you just rock up and turn up to work every day and then go home at the end of your shift and everything. But if you're working in somewhere like this, you're working as part of a great big machine. So everybody has their own, the labour is all divided up in different ways. Everybody has their own purpose on the site, but you're working towards this great thing. So something like making a lighthouse requires so many different sorts of things. So it's not just what the people putting it together at the end of the day. You needed the fuel, so you had to dig it out of Chance's colliery. You had bricks to make the buildings from Chance's brickworks. You had the chemicals from down the way to make the glass, and then the skills to make it assembly with. And the skills were gathered from people from all over the world. So expertise from everywhere, all going into making this one interesting thing at the end of it.
Go and take some gas samples from the actual glass tanks, the 2 roll plate tanks on the south side of the works, number 3 and number 4, and we had to take some gas samples from across the surface of the glass. So the engineering department had to make for us an implement of getting this gas sample. So we had this long silica tube which would withstand the temperature with a metal handle that was water cooled, and attached to that was a rubber tube to a bellows where we took the sample. Well, the first time we tried it, the water boiled so that we couldn't hold the handle, and our coats got charred by the heat. And so they decided that they would give us protection, and so we wore asbestos coats and asbestos hats. Fortunately, there was no dust, so we never got asbestosis. And those are the sort of things that happened all the time. You would be doing things that were not the run of the mill type of things, but you remember those sort of things.
The biggest legacy for me, for Chance's, right from the start all the way through to this project, is actually family. So many people. It's a family company. It was made by the Chance family, and lots of thousands of people, not probably more than that over the years, have started families on that site, another site of a Chance site as well. And that's been the same for me. Myself, I met my partner there, and we've started our own family since meeting at Chance Glassworks. So for me, that's the biggest thing. Is it's all about its legacy. Is going to be family.
So again, I can remember driving up the motorway and seeing the building, the 7-story building. Yeah. Seeing Chance Brothers or Chance Glass on the side. And then over the years, you could see that it was deteriorating, and it was eventually going to basically just fall apart. And, I was quite conscious, I think, even at that stage, that something needed to be done. And when I discovered that the Chance Heritage Trust had got going, and I thought that was fantastic. So, yeah, I'm very hopeful for the future. And I think it's not just... not just from a family perspective, but I think for the community, it's very important that the history of the building, the history of the company continues in some way, and that the buildings are used for the benefit of local people, business, housing, creative industries, whatever they decide to do with it.
I can always remember when, because I'm a Smethwickian and born and bred, I'm very interested in the history of Smethwick. And Mary Bodfish, who belongs to the Smethwick Heritage Unit, gave a lecture when borough celebrated its centenary on all things made in Smethwick. Of course, she spoke about the Great Exhibition, about the 2 million square feet of glass that Chance Brothers provided. And I went to Mary after the lecture and said, why were we not taught this at school? We've never been taught our history. I said, fortunately, I've worked at Chance Brothers, so I have some understanding of what a great company it was. But a lot of our children, and obviously our adults, have no concept of how important Chance Brothers was, not only in our industrial history, but the philanthropy that the family shared what they had with the populace in general. West Smethwick Park, Worley Woods, they made such contributions, and I don't think it should ever be lost.
I'm interested in the history of what it's like what it's been like to be a worker of various industries in the past. And I think what stands Chance out is that they are an interesting place to have worked and to have been an employee. So there's lots of people that have been employed from all different parts of the world. There's, they employed people from France in the 1830s and so on and so on. So you would have learned lots of different skills and done unique stuff that you wouldn't have done elsewhere. So all of the history of innovation in that and the things which we've learned about that has gone around the world, all done by individual people in Smethwick with all their own personal stories.
So there are two things that the development represents to me. That's bringing the past back into the present and the future. And the biggest thing as well is aspiration. It's an area that's of a lot of deprivation in that area, and it has been for some time. And the site in its current state, and the state that it's been in for 30 plus years, it is a representation of the current deprivation of the area, and bringing it back into use for the community, the local community, as well as other people around the world that are interested in the site. It will actually show that the area does have aspirations to improve, and to show the area in its best light. I think that's the biggest thing for me that the development will bring.
The Providence Society they started up, and the health and welfare, that sickness fund, all the provision they made with the acres and acres of recreation grounds, the leisure they put on, the Christmas they put on, the convalescent home they put on. It wasn't a turn up, do your 8 hours or 11, depending on how bad things were in the industry, and go home. And it certainly wasn't the sort of grasping Victorian devil owner that would give them their wages and they'd get it first bit back in rent and the second bit back in the company shop and the last bit back in the pub. There was, I think, a genuine feeling that there was an obligation on the owners and on the management to look after their people. And this came through, it wasn't just all philanthropy. It was known to them that, for instance, an educated worker was a safer worker, was a more productive worker. So the schools were open for the benefit of the children of the workers, but they're also mandatory for the ill-educated or uneducated workers. And it was part philanthropy, but there was a certain amount of pragmatism involved as well. That legacy, even though now it's a couple of generations old, has lasted. And I get asked for my autograph still, which is extremely embarrassing because it feels like stone and valor to me in some ways, because it's not it's nothing to do with me. It's nothing to do with my dad. It's 2 generations past. But
well, we should be very proud of them because they were world beaters. I mean, Guest King Nettlefiles supplied screws and things all over the world. And the pumps were produced, and Avery's, of course, produced scales, which, of course, they still do, but it's Avery Burkle now. And Chance's, of course, made the glass, which was fitted into the Crystal Palace, along with the ironmongery, which was produced by Fox Henderson, which was also a Smethwick firm. And he's only remembered today the fact that there's a road opposite called London Street. And, of course, that was where the Crystal Palace was eventually erected. So it was nice to think I knew all these companies and all these firms that existed, because when you left school, when I was 15, 16, you could pick which company you wanted to go and work for. There were so many firms, And
it's an industrial site. It's not the only one in Smethwick, even of the same kind of national story kind of level of importance, because the Soho site is also absolutely vital. But between the two sites at the different ends of Smethwick and the canals running in between, you have a site of immense national industrial heritage. And if you were to get rid of that, it would be losing a major part of it. So you have the story of metalwork and steam and coal mining and everything, but you also got the story of associated industries. Everything relied on one another. A really good example is the Crystal Palace, the Great Exhibition in 1851. So the glass was all made up at this end of Smethwick, but the ironwork was made at the other end of Smethwick in the Fox Henderson works on the canal. And what I think was really interesting is that the two integrate and work together. I mean, it's a really important site. There aren't many buildings of that scale and size that still exist from that period. It's really important to show how industry is linked into the canal network and the other transport networks of the time. And it's a really good demonstration of that. It's not just above ground; it's below ground. It's got so much going for it. It's a complicated spot to know what to do with it. In its location next to the M5, but it's got a lot of history going for it and a lot of value, I think.
When you think of the railways, you think of the other things that we produced in this country and exported abroad. So it wasn't just important for Britain, but it was important for what was then the empire, countries all over the world. Lighthouses are a very good example of that. What's created here in the West Midlands went all over the world and benefited trade and seamen. So it is important to remember those things, I think.
My thoughts on the development is it's hard to put into words because it's so community based and it's just so openly friendly, and they're trying to reach out every possible way they can. And I feel like that's just the important thing for me, because I don't think enough people know the history of their area, and this is a great way for people to know what started out in the area and how it built up around the world with the lighthouses and with all their glass.
Architecturally, it is of no merit. This is no Blenheim Palace. This is no Buckingham Palace. There's no House of Parliament. It's not a beautiful. There aren't beautiful buildings there. Historically, it's tremendously important. This is an old town. This town was in Doomsday, so this has been going for at least 1,000 years. If you take the canals out of the equation and the churches, there's very little here. Actually, only one church. There's very little here that predates 1850s. That's quite odd. If you go into the countryside, you see 200, 300, 400-year-old cottages, see churches which are 1,000 years old. Here we are in a village town it's over 1,000 years old. There's little to show for it. So from that point of view, the architecture is important, but it's more what it represents than what it is. And this was a mighty, mighty town in the industrial era, and we have lost almost every part of it. It's so nice to think that we can keep some of it, but not in Aspic.